Hey everyone, welcome back. Another episode of Talking Success. So following the theme of payments, which is obviously a big focus for kind of fintech in general, but certainly in emerging markets, it represents about 60%, I think, of kind of the market size. And I was at a conference just a few weeks ago, and this chap walked on stage with very skinny jeans and a very cool ponytail. Clearly, I don't have that ability, and started talking about the world of payments, but from a quite different perspective. We met really briefly, we shook hands, and then we kind of exchanged some messages on LinkedIn and had a chat about 2 weeks ago. And honestly, I think we could have gone on for 2 or 3 hours. And I wish I would have had this platform open. I could have recorded that rather than having to sort of invite him back and talk about it again. But it was so interesting. I think from anyone that's into the world of payments, entrepreneurship, startups, and perhaps people that are working in maybe corporate environments that are looking for that transition into kind of the world of startups and the world of fintech. Jonathan's story is pretty incredible. So I've asked him to come on today and spend a bit of time talking about his journey, how Gothenburg ended up being kind of Cape Town with a few stops in between, and really talking about the business that he's co-founded, Njia Pay, and I hope I've said that right. And we can talk about sort of where that fits into the ecosystem. It's a really interesting play, not one that I've seen in 2 decades of, well, obviously fintech moves at a rapid space, so I wouldn't expect to see it, but certainly something in the last couple of years I've not seen that sort of model. So I really wanted to delve a little bit deeper into that. But Jonathan, listen, thanks so much for coming on board. And I know you've just come back from holiday, so it's good to see you. And I'd love you to give a sort of bit of an intro, a bit about your background, and we can delve in.
Sounds great. No, thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Yeah, where to begin? Indeed, you mentioned it. I'm born and raised in Sweden, and ended up on the east coast of the U.S. To attend college. Played football, soccer, and after college, I did not make it professionally, so it was time to start working. And after a short stint on Wall Street, I joined Royal Bank of Scotland, and that was the first entry into payments. I still remember having the final interview with the head of US payments for RBS, and Stephen takes up his first iPhone at that time, says this is the future of payments. And he was, of course, spot on. That was in 2011.
Yeah.
And did a year there and then moved back to Europe, and was fortunate to join the Dutch payments company Adyen in the early days. We were about 100 people when I joined in 2012, and got to experience the hyper growth that they had. So I did about 3 years there with them in Amsterdam. For one of my first big clients was Groupon back in the days when they were a very relevant company. It was funny because I checked their market cap versus Adyen, and it's gone in the complete opposite direction over the past decade. So,
what were you doing at Adyen? What was kind of your role? You studying payments, but was it sort of payments, sort of the infrastructure side? Obviously, that's kind of Adyen's background. But what were you specifically doing?
Great question. I joined as an account manager.
Okay.
And was mainly hired for the Nordic segment. And so when in 2013 Spotify came to us and started using Adyen for payments, back then Adyen had just we sort of copied Braintree and Stripe to a certain extent, because similar to the South African market, you had your pure API connections where the merchant was needed to be PCI compliant, sort of the payment card industry security standards. And it's costly for a merchant, and it puts a lot of constraints on their internal systems.
Yeah.
So a lot of smaller, mid-sized companies do not go down that path, which is why hosted payment pages are so relevant. And that's, of course, the redirect to a page owned by the PSP. And Braintree and Stripe around this time had launched sort of client-side encryption, which was sort of the JavaScript owned by the payment company on the merchant's website. And Adyen launched their version of that type of technology as well. And Spotify was one of the first somewhat large companies to come on board and leverage that because they were not PCI compliant.
Right. Okay.
And they were just using legacy Swedish PSP at that point in time. And also were growing quite rapidly across Europe, and they needed to access local payment methods such as Ideal here in the Netherlands and some other relevant payment types across Europe, and then of course globally as well.
Yeah.
So I was sort of responsible for managing those type of companies, and then some Acne, which is a Swedish brand. That's the tight jeans that I had on the stage as well.
Okay.
One of my favorite pair of jeans, and then I did that for about 3 years here in Europe. And in 2014, Adyen grew quite rapidly out of the Silicon Valley space. We brought on the head of payments from Netflix, Cameron Saki, who had been with PayPal for a number of years prior to Netflix, to sort of grow Adyen in North America. So he came on board in 2014, and we started bringing on board the likes of Uber, Facebook, Netflix, Microsoft, and then we needed some help growing that office, as well as the account management team to support these large enterprise clients. And these companies were mainly using Adyen internationally at that point in time because that was our strength. And of course, our goal was always to get as much of their US volume, but it takes time. Payments I always say payments equals patience. It doesn't happen overnight in that sense that you just switch. So moved over to San Francisco in 2015 and spent about 5.5 years there. And first 3 years was leading the account management team. So I got to work closely with all of these large enterprise companies to really get to see underneath the hood, how do a Netflix look at payments?
Yep.
What are some of the important factors for them around data that we are able to provide them and products that we are able to offer to them? And at this point in time, Adyen was very agile. And I think that's one of the key reasons that we grew as much and as fast as we did, because we were competing with a lot of the large legacy payment providers, such as WorldPay, Fiserv, Chase, and we were able to deliver new products at a speed that these large companies had never seen before. And it took us sometimes weeks to deliver products that the networks, Visa, MasterCard, came out with, such as real-time account updater. And it took some of the competitors years, just to give you an idea.
Why was that? Because I think that's an important question, right? What made Adyen different back then in terms of being able to be agile and having that ability to roll out product after product? Was it a cultural thing? Was it a technology thing? Was it cloud enabled? What was the differentiator? Was it a combination?
A combination of I would say the first two, because Adyen is somewhat legacy in that sense that they actually own their own physical data centers on the premises versus cloud.
Yep.
But the culture, it was really, it was an environment where we were all encouraged to do the right thing and to break barriers, and decisions were made pre-IPO on the go, where I would come to Cameron, who was president of North America, and say, Netflix has this request and we have this opportunity. What do you think? This is what we would need from a technical standpoint. He would then have a chat with potentially Ingo, the CFO, or Roland, CCO, or the CTO, and discuss sort of, does this make sense? If it was a big enough project, if it was not a big enough project, he would just say, yeah, if the technical team says it's possible, just do it. So that sort of culture was really something we emphasized quite early and kept for a long time.
Amazing.
And that also because they own the whole tech stack. And that's the one thing that truly differentiates them. They are a gateway, a processor, and an acquirer.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't rely on any third party in that value chain, which is the challenge that a lot of the legacy guys are facing. It's either they are leveraging a third party processor like an ACI, a First Data, or they may have multiple platforms that they have acquired throughout the years. So for them to offer one product across the whole ecosystem, it takes a lot longer versus Adyen, where you do it once and then you get access to the product across the whole world where they were operating.
It sounds like a fascinating experience. I mean, to work at any scale up and rapid growth business, especially in an industry that clearly you started and enjoyed. What was next though? And maybe we can jump a little bit because a lot of our sort of viewers and listeners kind of from the African continent, a lot in South Africa, and they're probably sitting here going, "Why is a Swede and a Brit going to be talking about South Africa? What on earth do they know?" But let's talk a bit about that journey. How did Africa or South Africa come up in your radar from the valley to from Gothenburg to the valley and then over to the mountain?
Yeah, no, I think it started in 1998 when I was 13 years old, and my dad brought me and my brothers down to Zambia for the first time, because that's he's worked in Southern Africa and some of the countries down there, Zimbabwe and Botswana, for 30 plus years, and I've since been involved in some of the projects that we've had down there. So, but when I moved back to Europe after 8 years in California about a year and a half ago, I got contacted by an entrepreneur from Nigeria living in the Netherlands, needing some advice around how to build a payments fintech business, and started working with him. And as part of my market research, helping him, I got in contact with a Dutch company operating across the continent called Talk 360.
Yep.
And Talk 360 had built out a payments platform in-house because they were struggling, growing quite rapidly, and payments were preventing them from grow as quickly as they could. They were operating in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa, and globally as well. And they had to have 6 different PSPs. And each PSP, of course, comes with an integration, checkout page, settlement reports, portal, and it just became too cumbersome for them to manage. And they built out Njia Pay, the first version, and saw tremendous success. They increased the conversion by 25% because now they controlled the checkout page. So they were able to say, if in Kenya they want to offer M-Pesa, these are the fields that the user needs to fill out, not everything that their previous PSP required. So they decided as a strategic decision to spin out Njia Pay into a separate entity. And after having met Hans and Dean, the 2 founders of Talk 360, and helped work a little bit with Talk 360 for a couple of weeks and months, I decided to join the team here at Njia Pay as the CEO and co-founder to sort of lead the new venture and the spin-off. And that's how I ended up in the African payments ecosystem.
Amazing. All right, so let's talk about the Njia Pay. What that is and where that fits into the ecosystem, because I think it's still very fragmented in terms of lots of different players. There's a little bit of vanilla kind of essence going on, I think, as well at the moment. A lot of people offering the same type of product because very, very I don't know what's wrong with me today. Very heavy regulated environment in which we operate here in South Africa. A new legislation coming in across other countries. So where does Njia Pay fit in? If you were to kind of explain it to me that isn't necessarily a payments expert.
Yeah, So we are what we like to say a payments as a service, or a payments with a service provider. So we're slightly different than a PSP. So a PSP is, think of a Peach Payments, a Paystack, a Stitch.
Mhm.
And we sit above the PSP, and we are integrating into the PSPs. And what we offer our clients is a payment management platform. So they would do one integration into Njia Pay, and then we would aggregate all of the various PSPs in the regions that they are operating in. And then we are able to orchestrate the traffic between the PSPs based on performance, based on least cost routing, and based on other attributes. So this was or is extremely relevant for companies who operate in multiple countries.
Sure.
And also relevant in markets where, think of South Africa, where you may need to have two PSPs in order to get the highest level of performance from an auth rate perspective,
Mhm.
the biggest reach from a payment method perspective, and also from a redundancy perspective. And that redundancy piece in emerging markets is extremely important. And it's not always the PSP's fault. And that's the one thing I always make sure I mention. When the PSP cannot connect to the processor or the acquirer, the payment will fail.
Yeah.
What we always make sure we do is, if a client comes to us and they only have one PSP, we always say we need to add a second PSP. What's equally as important is to understand the current PSPs, who is their processor and acquiring bank. Because what you don't want is to go with, hypothetically, PSP A, PSP B, who both are leveraging ACI or both are leveraging CyberSource and both are using Absa Bank in the backend.
Sure.
So you want to make sure that those two have different rails that the transaction is running on. And then we can consolidate all of that on one platform with, instead of having two hosted payment pages, now you have one unified checkout page that you also get more control over. How do you want to design it? What payment methods do you want to offer based on your user demographic? And then you can configure and say, I want to send 10% of the traffic to PSP A and 90% of the traffic to PSP B or 2. And if it fails, you can automatically retry it, vice versa. And that requires us to be PCI compliant.
Okay.
Because we will hold the card details, so we can do that routing, which in the case of a merchant who is not, it becomes extremely difficult. And that's sort of how Njia Pay sits in the payments ecosystem today.
Great, thank you. I've got a few questions, obviously. So you described the business as a payments with a service or platform with a service payment system. That's a lot of letters, but let's go with platform as a service or payments as a service. Where does that differ? Or how does that differ from payments orchestration? Because there are quite a few orchestrators that similarly maybe sit in the same space, or is it different? How?
Yeah, and indeed, I mean, part of our platform is that orchestration part.
Yeah.
And you can even say that some of the PSPs can also orchestrate between the acquiring banks that they are connected to. And so in one way, we don't differ too much from the payment orchestration providers that are out there.
Mhm.
I think the main differentiating factor is that we offer products and features and functionality that are slightly outside of the scope of the PSPs who claim to do orchestration as well. Think things like payouts, reconciliation, billing, etc. But I always say we are, to a certain extent, a payment orchestration provider. And it's just that terminology, to me, has been sort of thrown around quite a lot in the payment space the past couple of years. And one way to also describe us is as a payment gateway, as a technical gateway into the PSPs as well. Because in the end, that's the technical piece that we are into some of these payment providers.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Because some of the orchestration players, I probably don't need to mention names, but are partners with you guys as well in terms of, you connect to them and they would then orchestrate. So there's quite a flow. What does this mean to the merchant and what does this mean to the consumer? Let's start with the latter one first. Payments is about trust, and I know I've had this conversation many times. If I am walking around a market stall and someone pulls out a POS that I don't recognise, I'm like, no chance, right? I think with e-com as well, there are, unfortunately, nature of the beast, there are lots of frauds and illicit activity that happens. How do you go about winning consumer trust, or do you hand that off to the merchant and it's because it's white labeled, it's actually down to the merchant to handle?
Absolutely, we allow the merchant to decide and manage that. For example, if they want to have secured or powered by Njia Pay on the checkout page, they can, if they believe that would add additional level of trust and add PCI level 1 certified, then that's totally up to them. And I understand it, because again, I think it was 12, 13 years ago when my mom said, you know what, I finally bought something online today with my card because I saw Adyen was the processor of the pet store that she was buying dog food at.
Right.
And she had always bought it with Klarna because for her, that was the trust factor.
Mm-hmm.
That's also what we are saying. We can, if you want us to put the powered by Peach, if that's the PSP on there, it's totally up to the merchant, because that's one of the things we want to give the power to the merchant to decide, do you feel like this will help your consumers trust your brand, or do you feel like it hurts the user experience when they check out to have those logos or brands on the checkout page?
Very interesting. I think from a consumer perspective, certainly on e-com side, I don't know, maybe just me as a bit of a geek. I always like to see, a logo that I recognise that. But I'm in the industry, and I'm not sure many consumers would know, ACI or Adyen.
No.
It's not a consumer brand. Perhaps if you see, Visa or Mastercard, they'd actually, okay, that's kind of recognizable, and that's fine. So really interesting, and I guess from a merchant perspective, they can test this, right? So they can kind of A/B test, actually what's converting higher. Is there, is there more conversion when we do put the logos or when we don't, and sort of tailoring that towards. Yeah,
and that's our advice as well. It's the best way to figure out, run A/B test. Let's do 2 checkout pages.
Yeah.
Run that 50-50 for a month and see if we get that significant data, and then let the data decide.
Absolutely. Yeah, take the emotion out of it. I want to talk about the future of payments. Now, you were on stage a few weeks ago, and I think someone mentioned the C word, or it may have been the S word. For those who are not following me, I'm not being rude here. I'm talking about crypto and stablecoin. So, Jonatan, what's your view on that? But before you answer, just to throw something else into the mix as well, we've got PayShap here in South Africa, instant payment rails that been developed by BankServe that are now pretty much owned by the SARB. So what's your view in terms of the future of payments domestically here in South Africa? And given you've kind of got that global mindset, well, where do you see and how do you see that developing in other countries? That was a very long question with lots of sub questions, but
yes, and a lot to unpack there. But
sorry.
I think I'll start with the easy one. No, I love it, and this is also why I think next time we'll need to have the 2 hours and a beer next to us. But instant payment is, I think it's a must down in South Africa. It is being pushed, of course, but it's slow rollout because the power is not sitting with one entity who decides what the cost is of the payment and the thresholds and the user experience. I think PayShap is a great initiative, but has not been rolled out perfectly, in my honest opinion. If you compare it to Pix in Brazil or UPI, which are sort of the two comparison, I think there's a lot to learn there. But I also love it because I'm a big user of what's known as Swish in Sweden. That is instant peer-to-peer and is now getting more and more traction when it comes to buying online or buying from a business.
Sure.
And it's a fixed fee. So, of course, the merchants, they like it because they know how much it would be. And so that's sort of quickly on the PayShap side of it. And then on the stable coin and crypto, I think it's a lot to unpack there. But I first and foremost say from an industry perspective, stablecoin is being hyped up right now, but it's been used for a couple of years already. And there are a number of use cases that we can talk about for stablecoin, and especially in emerging markets where, I mean, I paid a freelancer in Kenya and it cost us 12 euros to send money to him, and his bank also charged him from receiving money.
Yeah.
So basically 1/3 of the total amount went to the banks. And it took, over a week for the funds to clear and get there.
Sure.
If we would use a company like a startup out of the UK, Rafiki,
Yeah, I know Rafiki. Yeah.
who uses stable coins and fiat to onboard and offboard, that would be almost instantaneously and a lot cheaper. So those use cases are perfect for stablecoin. And in addition, treasury management for large corporate that are operating all over the world, both from an FX exposure perspective and also from a speed and cash management perspective, fantastic. In developed markets like Europe, where I can send funds to Sweden, to Portugal today, right now, and within seconds, it will be arriving on the bank account of the recipient, it's not as relevant. No. Nor is it as relevant for me as a consumer to buy using crypto or stablecoin. I'm an investor. I have a portfolio, but my crypto exposure is not the largest. So I might not be the perfect user for that example either. But even from a consumer perspective, the volatility with crypto as a payment method is, of course, where stablecoin comes in, but that's where the adoption is not yet there, both from a merchants accepting it and from a providers across the ecosystem accepting it as well, and then from a user adoption perspective. So that's where stablecoin has somewhat been hyped up, I think, over the past 6 to 9 months, but the use cases are absolutely real. It's just a matter of finding the right use cases.
Yeah, especially for the cross-border, absolutely. Liquidity management makes complete sense. And you're right. Remittance. You were paying someone for a service, but there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that send money back to Africa. Diaspora, and they may send $100, and the recipient gets 85 if they're lucky. So there is that sort of peer-to-peer side or P2P side that I think is also perhaps a user case. But let's sorry, my mind goes when I talk about these things. But I guess if there was a licensed CASP, so crypto asset service provider here in South Africa, that did accept multiple forms of crypto, there is no reason why Njia Pay couldn't aggregate there as well and use that as a payment method if the client chose to. It might be a high value merchant, or it might be a luxury brand, or it might be a tech brand that wants to feel current and accept crypto. I guess they could plug into you guys as well, or not.
Absolutely, and that's one of the benefits of Njia Pay is, of course, that you are not tied to your PSP and their roadmap. If a stable coin payment provider blows up and becomes extremely popular, we can add that provider within a few days as part of our offering. And it's sort of the same with PayShap. And Capitec recently launched recurring payment for their Capitec Pay. And so we can go and support that without the PSP needing to support that. And so that's sort of where we are saying we're agnostic for the PSPs or payment methods, because we can pretty easily add that type of payment methods onto our platform or provider in that sense.
And then I'm going to kind of circle back to the beginning part of this conversation, not right at the beginning, but a little bit through your story. Given the international side of what you were doing at Adyen and RBS prior to that, what's the international play here? Because obviously, you've got multiple PSPs in different countries, different regulations, different payment methods, and different perhaps expectations in terms of what a payment looks like and where that fits into their business. Are you looking at a Pan-African kind of approach now? Because obviously Talk 360 is in a number of markets. So are you already active in those markets? Are you just sort of starting in South Africa and then using that as a launch pad? What's the plan?
Yeah, so we are live across a number of African countries with a variety of providers, both domestic, local providers, and also merchant of record providers that sort of the start button who offers international merchants like Talk 360 access M-Pesa in Kenya without having a local entity, and then remit the funds out of Kenya as well. And one of the things that I learned at Adyen is solve the challenges for your clients and they will be happy and stay with you. And that's sort of the approach that we are taking. And right now, most of our clients are South African companies struggling with payments in South Africa. And that's sort of, I would say 80% of our clients are South African right now. And they are everything from online retailers trying to sell internationally, and their PSP does not support USD as a payment processing currency or euros. So they are seeing extremely low conversion. Or they are a subscription merchant and their PSP does not support account updater. So they are seeing a lot of involuntary churn because cards are expired and the user does not update the card, or they cannot optimize based on routing and retries. So that's sort of where right now our main focus is. But then we have also a handful of international clients that are actively engaging or integrating with us now, because for them, Africa is the new frontier. That's where they see the next 10 years of their growth coming from.
Sure.
And they don't want to build 6 to 10 integration across the continent and try various providers to realize this provider actually was not really reliable. So that's where they say one integration into Njia Pay, and then we can grow together with them based on their roadmap. So for me personally, I say right now the focus is on South Africa, but we are actively looking at the Pan-African play as well.
Look, it's a fascinating model. And just before we go, because I know we said try and keep this to half an hour, but that was never going to happen. Just before we go, there was the commercial angle, the pricing of this. And honestly, when I looked at the site, I was like, really? I've not seen that before.
No.
I think merchants, okay, so if there's any merchants listening to this, you have your transaction fees, whatever it may vary between 2 and 3.5%, maybe 4%, depending. And there's always, as we said a bit earlier, there's always someone in the chain that's always taking a little bit here, there, a point here and a point there, and the rails, or whether it be the acquiring bank or whoever it may be, the PSP. But I can now see after this conversation where the W comes in, the W with a service, because you're a tech platform, but you're also offering that service where you can consult with your clients and go, actually, you need to have a failover here and a redundancy there. And have you thought about this? And if you want to accept payments in Kenya, then you need to use this PSP because of M-Pesa. If you want Nigeria, then you're going to have to use somehow with InterSwitch. Or so I can see kind of where that's coming in. But talk me through not necessarily the numbers, but the sort of the thought behind the pricing model, because it's very unique.
Yeah, and that's again the payments with the service is really something that came up in the last 2 months, and because that's part of what we want to sell is really that service part to your point, because one of the the challenges with payments is you can never compare one merchant to another merchant unless they are almost identical in the type of demographic or business model. Like, I think Spotify and Netflix is probably the perfect example where you can compare. So that's really where we are identifying the business needs, their requirements, and then we'll make a recommendation based on that, because it could be that various providers are better for different industries.
Yep.
And that's important for us to distinguish. And that's also why we're saying we charge a monthly fixed fee for our platform. And then, of course, it depends on the size of the merchant, the number of transactions that they do, as well as the product services that they want to leverage. If you want fraud, or if you don't, then the pricing will be slightly different. If you really want that service, what we say, your in-house payment management consultation, then that's of course a slightly different. But yeah, that's sort of why lastly, what I'll say is we don't want to commingle our fees with the PSP's fees, because the PSP, indeed, they have the transaction fee, and then there's the interchange fee, and then there's the scheme fee, and then there's the acquiring markup. And then, so if we would add a fifth fee on top of that, it would sort of be harder for the merchant to truly identify what's the cost and what's the ROI that I'm getting for the service that Njia Pay is providing.
I guess it keeps you, keeps the merchant with the knowledge that you're pretty much independent, right? And you're offering a non-bias service to them, rather than it being incorporated within a fee where it's not it's not transparent at all, right? I think you speak to any merchant and you go, if your 2.5% that you pay, how much goes to the rails? And no one's going to have a clue, right? So I completely get it. I think it's a fascinating product and business, and we wish you all the very best. And I'm going to catch up with you for probably a 3-4 hour lunch at some point. We can talk about. You know what? When you were talking a bit earlier about some of your examples, I was dying to say something about IKEA and bringing up a flat pack to stage and building your own stool to sit on, but I didn't. I stopped myself. We can talk that through next time we see each other. But thank you so much. If people are interested, obviously, in finding out a bit more about you and the business, we'll put the links on the bottom here, so people can feel free to have a look at Njia Pay and maybe connect to you on LinkedIn. You're pretty active, and it's been a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. Thanks for having me, and see you in a few weeks.
Absolute pleasure. Take care.
Yes.